Hi, I'm Sue, and this is Savage Spiel War Stories. One thing that really struck me when reading William Gibson's Neuromancer is just how well it's aged. There's a few dated bits and bobs in it. There's the notorious mention of 3 megabytes of hot RAM. There's quite a few mentions of payphones, since William Gibson completely failed to predict the rise of cellular networks. But despite all that, this book feels fresh and futuristic, as much as it must have done nearly 40 years ago when it was first published. Which makes it even more remarkable that the game Cyberpunk 2020, despite being heavily based on Neuromancer, is nevertheless one of the most 80s things that ever happened. It's actually that caused me to play it. We were going through some old role-play books, and there we found a copy of Cyberpunk 2020. And we had a look at the character creation, and just for a laugh ran me up a character, and then we looked at my new rocker boy and all her light-tattooed and tech-haired glory, and we thought it might actually be a good laugh to play a game set in the 80s future. And so it was that the chrome rock band Doomcow set out in search of fame and fortune in Night City. We were a 3-piece band. We had Theodore Kurita on guitars and keyboards, we had Symbol of Death on percussion, and we had my character, Lexi Wolf, on lead vocals. Now, if you're a fan of the comedy metal band Steel Panther, you probably already know everything there is to know about Lexi Wolf. For the rest of you, let me tell you a bit about Cyberpunk 2020. This is a game that really, really rewards min-maxing. And so I gave Lexi everything she needed to be really, really good at being a rock star. Dexterity, empathy, and looks. Which didn't leave a lot of points left over for anything else, which meant that she had the lowest possible intelligence. She was a bimbo. It's worth remembering that Cyberpunk is a D10 system rather than the more popular D20, and that means that crits and fumbles happen twice as often as they do in games like D&D. Also, my home group have a house rule. If you get a crit or a fumble, or if you see somebody else get a crit or a fumble, you gain improvement points equal to the number that they crit or fumbled by. This has led to a large number of interesting situations taking place in the course of this campaign. The first step on Doomcow's road to fame and fortune was, of course, to play some gigs, and to do that we needed to be able to perform. So we all headed down to the park for band practice. Okay guys, here we go. 1, 2, many, lots. And the rest of the band spontaneously learnt how to sing. This was obviously a great start to Doomcow's career, and it wasn't long before we got signed by... Well, if you ask Lexi, who, let's not forget, wasn't bright, they'd been signed by a super cool record label. If you ask the rest of the band, it was probably an organised crime syndicate. But they were paying. And that was all that mattered, wasn't it? Off we went, on tour. I mentioned in one of my previous videos about our group doing one of the 2 most dangerous things in Cyberpunk 2020, getting into a gunfight. Well, we did the other most dangerous thing you can do in Cyberpunk 2020, which is drive a vehicle. I forget exactly why we were needing to make a quick getaway in the tour bus or what had happened to our normal driver, but nevertheless we needed to escape, and Lexi decided she was going to drive. This should have been okay. Lexi didn't actually have any skill points in drive. Nevertheless, she did have 10 in dexterity, and that really should have been enough to carry her through most driving situations. Oops. Did you know it's possible to flip a tour bus end over end and then land on the gas tank? I am so glad I paid the extra to have my clothes made fireproof. Lexi wasn't going to let a little thing like setting the tour bus on fire hold her back, however. That seemed like a great title for a song. We found inspiration for songs all over the place. Once we even found it on a character sheet. This was back in the days when we all used paper character sheets rather than modern apps and VTTs. But now and then these did provide something of an obstacle. Theodore Carita's player was looking at his inventory one day and asked the rest of us, "What's a bro tube?" I looked at his character sheet. It did indeed say bro tube. Symbol of Death's player looked at his character sheet. Yep, says bro tube. The GM looked at the character sheet. I'm sure I didn't give you a bro tube, but that does say bro tube. Hey guys, I know what a bro tube is. It's the title of our next song. Can anyone remind me how to do words? There was one thing that Lexi always dreamed of, and that was living the whole sex, drugs and rock and roll lifestyle. Unfortunately for her, she was a character in a Cyberpunk 2020 game. Now, I understand. This game came out in 1990. The Satanic Panic was still fresh in people's memories. I completely understand why all of the drugs in Cyberpunk 2020 are awful. But it did somewhat hinder the whole 80s-ness of the thing. Ultimately, though, we did pick one drug that we decided was the drug that the band would be okay using. It's called Sweetness. It was a type of cigarettes that increase your cool stat. I can only assume that they're somehow infused with essence of David Bowie. But they did have a side effect, and that side effect was time dilation. It could go either way. It could slow things down or speed things up. It was completely random. And that is how Doomcow, in the world of Night City, ended up inventing both prog rock and speed metal. Doomcow were well on the way to the top. We had a fancy house, fancy cars, we threw wild parties. But our troubles weren't quite over. And part of that was due to the fact that the rest of the band had decided to get full Borg conversions and were both on the verge of cyberpsychosis. So it wasn't entirely surprising one morning when Lexi came downstairs after a particularly wild party and discovered that Symbol of Death had murdered one of the partygoers. Okay guys, here's what we're going to do. He's got trauma team coverage, so we're going to have to get on the phone to them and convince them not to show up. Get the CCTV footage from last night. We'll have his voice on it. We need to synthesize his voice print, plug that into my electronic throat so I can mimic his voice, and then you're going to have to tell me what to say because that is literally all the thinking I can do this week. But unexpected murders weren't the only thing Lexi had to deal with as a rock star. She also had to deal with a stalker. A stalker who had become obsessed with Lexi, who wanted to reproduce the band for herself. Of course, at some point this did lead to her trying to kidnap Lexi. I'm glad to say that the attempt was foiled, and the stalker was dealt with. And then we found what she was keeping in her house. 7 clones of me? Oh, they're so beautiful. The rest of the band was suitably horrified. Lexi, on the other hand, just wasn't smart enough to think through the implications of this. Hey guys, I've got an idea. How about we install a brain dance chip in my head, and then me and the 7 clones can all get naked. So that is the story of Doomcow, one of Night City's more interesting bands. And yes, we made a lot of money off that brain dance.